I grew up in an extremely small rural town in Florida on a farm. The population of our town was less than 1,000 people. The closest city, Gainesville, Florida, was about an hour away. The nights were pitch black dark because there were no street lights or light pollution. Like in the city, except for the light of a million stars. My great-grandfather passed away when I was about 8 years old, leaving my granny heartbroken. We lived a field away from my great-grandmother, who was about 75 at the time. Unfortunately, Granny had already started getting early Alzheimer's and sometimes didn't act like herself. The family besides me decided that it would be best if I moved in with her so that she didn't have to be alone in the evenings and at night. Granny lived in an old farmhouse that she had helped build by hand with my granddaddy in the 1930s. The house was constructed of wood with a tin roof. We did have electricity at this time, but no air conditioner or telephone. The front door was wood and the top half of the door was a glass window pane with a small decorative curtain across the very top. The kind you might see on a kitchen window. Needless to say, anyone could see inside the house as clearly as we could see them. The door lock was the original one made by my granddaddy. It wasn't really a lock at all. It was a piece of wood nailed to the frame that you turned horizontally when you closed the door, meant to keep someone from pushing the door open. I slept in the room with my granny. Our bedroom was at the very front of the house, right next to the front door. And my bed was pushed directly up to the window that looked out over the front porch and yard. I always felt safe because my family and aunts and uncles lived in the adjacent farms all around us. In 1990, that all changed. I was 10 years old by now. Granny was getting more forgetful, sometimes wandering around the house at night. In the nearby city, something awful had occurred. A man had broken into apartments of several college students in Gainesville, murdered them, and done horrible things to their bodies. There were no suspects. The police called him the Gainesville Ripper. Rumors spread through the community like wildfire. Some said the killer was dressing up like a cable man or electric man to get people to let him in their door. Fear and anxiety grew daily as the police had no leads. My dad decided it was time to teach me how to use our family weapon, just in case. Dad took me out in the woods, and I practiced. That night, I fell asleep with the weapon beside the head of my bed, with clear instructions to not open the door for anyone we didn't know. As a 10-year-old, I felt like this was a pretty big responsibility, and my anxiety kept me from sleeping much those next few nights. They reassured me that I would never have to use the weapon, but better to be safe than sorry. Until the next night, which was the most terrifying night of my life up until this point. I was laying in bed looking at the digital clock on Granny's dresser, 3:05 a.m. in bright red digits. Granny had gotten up to wander around the kitchen. She did this often, and I just let her do what she thought she needed to do. I heard a tap on the front door window pane. I listened intently and then silence. Suddenly, the porch light flipped on, illuminating through my little window. What was Granny doing? I scurried out of bed to the front door just in time to reach for Granny's hand, as she was trying to turn the piece of wood keeping the door locked. At the same time, I looked out the window, my eyes meeting the eyes of a strange man standing there. The porch light was behind him, and I couldn't see his face very well, but his hair was long and unkempt. I did not know him. He jiggled the handle and pushed hard on the door with all his weight. I was terrified, and I excitedly screamed at Granny, asking what she was doing. She told me Granddaddy was at the door. She sometimes thought Granddaddy was still alive. There was no convincing her it wasn't him. With the man pushing furiously against the door, I had to drag Granny with both hands into the bedroom, so I could reach the weapon without giving her a chance to open the door. I grabbed the weapon and ran into the living room, aiming directly at the front door, my finger on the trigger. The stranger was gone. I had no telephone to call for help. We were trapped. I sat in the recliner by the front door, staring out into the darkness beyond the porch light, with weapon in hand for the rest of the night. Unable to swallow, shaking so hard I could barely aim the weapon, I waited for the man to return to try one of the flimsy windows or the back door. Every moving shadow, distant dog bark, bump in the night, or snap of a twig, had my heart racing and blood rushing through my ears. The wind would blow and make the screen door creak open and fall shut with a bang. It was torture. My arms ached from holding the weapon. My nightgown was soaked with sweat, and I was on the verge of bursting into swoon. Wrenching sobs, but I had a job to do, guarding us from the Ripper. Oblivious, Granny tottered around the kitchen getting ready to make breakfast, because Granddaddy would be wanting his coffee soon. I didn't argue or care what she did as long as she stayed away from that front door. I never saw another glimpse of the stranger, but I felt like he was out there watching us. After staying wide awake all night, terrified, holding vigil, I made sure Granny was back to sleep, slipped out the back door, and ran straight across the hayfields home to Mom and Dad for help once the sun came up in the morning. Police eventually caught the Gainesville Ripper, and it was not the same man I saw at our front door that night. My family hired an elderly lady to stay with Granny, and I moved home permanently. To this day, I don't know who was at the door on that pitch black night, but I still panic, looking out of windows at night into the darkness. In 2018, I broke up with my boyfriend and was nearly homeless. I moved across the country with him, and as life sometimes happens, it didn't work out. Unfortunately, I didn't know anyone where I was and I had nowhere to go. I was living out of my car for a couple of days until I found a beautiful little apartment complex that was accepting new tenants. I went in and pleaded my case to the management team there, and thankfully, they pulled some strings and got me in right away. I didn't have much to move in at first, since most of the stuff I left at my last place. As I slowly started to gather furniture, the place started to feel like a home. My cute little one-bedroom studio apartment became my pride and joy. It didn't take long for my ex-boyfriend to find where I was, and I kid you not, he would drop off boxes full of my stuff and leave it on the front steps of the apartment building. A real classy boy, that one. The apartments I was living in offered garages for your car or storage. Most of the tenants used it for storage. The only thing that wasn't ideal was that you were sharing the garage with another random tenant, and they weren't sorted out by the building or apartment number, but basically by whatever one was available. I got a garage unit that thankfully wasn't that far of a walk from my apartment. They had one left, and I felt incredibly lucky. When I made my way to the garage and opened it up, I was surprised to see an older man sitting in there just rocking in a chair. He was angry as soon as I opened the door, and he shouted, "Hey, get out of here. This is my garage." I was a bit uncomfortable, but I always stand my ground. In a very polite voice, I responded to the man, "I'm sorry, sir, but I just purchased the other half of this garage for my storage." "I'm sorry, but you'll have to share now." The man didn't like this. He got up out of his chair and made his way to the door and started shouting, "I don't think so." The man literally started to grab my boxes and throw them back into the parking lot. As I stood there, blown away by the antics of this man, he continued to complain, "I paid for this space, it's mine, get your crap out of there." Not wanting to escalate this anymore, I went back to the office and told the woman in charge that the old guy wouldn't let me in the garage. She looked annoyed as if this had been a problem before, and she went down there and laid down the law with this older guy. They went back and forth, but ultimately it ended with the guy moving his stuff to his side of the line. Yes, there was a literal line in the middle of the garage separating the two sides for each tenant. I brought my stuff in there as quickly as I could because I wanted nothing to do with this guy. He grumbled to himself the entire time I brought my stuff over, and I just ignored him. The next couple of days I had a bad feeling about my stuff. I didn't have anything insanely valuable in there, but most of the stuff in those boxes were personal belongings or sentimental to me in some way. One night early in the evening, I decided to go check on my stuff, and I couldn't believe what I saw. The man sitting in his chair rocking back and forth and wearing one of my scarves. I started to yell at the guy, and he responded, "This is my scarf, little lady." And that's when I noticed that he had gone through all of my boxes and thrown my belongings all over the garage. Clothes, paperwork, furniture, everything on my side were thrown all over the place. I called him out on it, and he became incredibly hostile and said, "I didn't touch your stuff. Now you relax." I went back to the management of the apartments and told them everything. She approached the man and they went at it again. The old man denied touching my stuff and claimed that it was like that when he came into the garage. I didn't buy it, and neither did the manager. I believe she threatened to evict the guy and told him that he could no longer have access to the garage. He had 2 days to get all of his belongings out of there. The man was upset and screaming. I almost felt bad for him until I remembered all of my stuff on the ground. The man left the garage in rage. I could hear him screaming all the way through the parking lot. When he was gone, I closed the door and started to pick up my belongings. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started to glance at his side. This guy had a ton of interesting stuff when I stopped to look at his side. It wasn't just junk and clutter, really unbelievable antiques. He had stuff from old wars, old movie posters, books, and anything cool you could think of. It was like a vault of treasure. I continued to put my stuff away, and that's when I noticed my scarf. He was right. The scarf he was wearing was in fact his scarf. I felt horrible and thought I owed the guy an apology. I even decided to myself that if I don't see him within the next 2 days, I'll tell the manager that he can store his stuff in my garage. I just don't want him in there unless I'm there. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens outside. I looked out from my balcony and I could see that the sirens were outside of my garage. I ran down there and I couldn't believe my eyes. The older man looked like he had been hit by a bus, but was standing up talking to the police and the manager of the apartments. I looked back at the car and it was insane. It was my ex-boyfriend. I ran over to the police and asked what was going on, and basically my ex had been breaking into my garage unit and going through all my stuff, basically just trying to make my life a nightmare. He wasn't trying to rob or steal anything. The old man knew that he was innocent and went down to the garage and waited all night for something to happen. Around 5 a.m. my ex started breaking in, and once he went over to my boxes and threw stuff around, the old man confronted him. A brief fight ensued, and the old guy was like some decorated war hero, and even at his advanced age, he was able to take down my ex. I thanked the man and tried to give him something, but he just wanted his garage back. I'm so thankful that this man cared enough about his stuff that he waited all night to prove that he was innocent, and thankfully he stopped him when he did, because I don't know how far my ex would have gone, or what he was capable of. I fed the old man leftovers for the year that I lived in that apartment, and I have since moved home with my parents. Don't judge a book by its cover, because sometimes it's the people we least expect that become our guardian angels.
Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that this is a true story. Not a single detail has been fabricated. During my first year of middle school, I developed a bit of a reputation as a wild child, and I've had several run-ins with our school's resource officer. One day when I was at home watching TV in the living room with my sister, someone rang the doorbell. This startled my younger sister because our parents weren't home. I was the oldest of 4 children, and despite my rebellious nature, I was still the big sister. I wasn't too worried about someone at our door because I figured it was probably the mailman or one of those annoying solicitors, or perhaps it was our neighbor checking in on us. I went to the door and politely asked, "Who is it?" "Open up, it's the police," a man's voice responded. By the way, our door had no peephole, that's a whole other story. But I could tell there was something off about this man's voice. It seemed cold and detached. I turned to my sister. "I don't know if this guy's really a cop. Go upstairs and go check on Jason and Ashley. I'll handle this." She darted up the stairs. The guy on the other side of the door began asking for somebody by name, claiming that they lived there. "I think you got the wrong place. No one by that name lives here." "Well, I have a warrant that says otherwise." "Are you lying to me, young lady?" "No, the guy that you're looking for doesn't live here." "Then who just ran up the stairs?" This immediately creeped me out. There was a long window by the front door. It had one of those thick frost layerings. It wasn't easy to tell who was inside if you were on the outside looking through it. But it didn't look like he was standing in front of the window. So when did he take a look? He would have had to focus real hard to see my sister because there were no lights on. Furthermore, it was midday, so it should have looked completely dark from where he was. I automatically felt threatened. Whoever this man was had crossed into creep territory. So now I was going to be a jerk. It was my sister, and she's obviously not the grown man that you're looking for. Why did she run? Because you're of *****ing weirdo. Excuse me? You don't talk to a police officer like that. The way he said that sounded like he was becoming annoyed, like I should just trust him on his word alone. Well, if you are a cop, you're not a very good one, because you're at the wrong address. And how do I even know that you are a cop? You should just open the door and see for yourself. That's when I saw my sister peeking around the corner at the top of the steps. "Get back," I whispered. We rarely get people at our door when my parents aren't home, but it's not impossible. I had this habit of locking the screen door. It was very strong for a screen door as well, and to clarify, it was one of those screen doors directly outside of the front door. Our front porch was open. I figured I would take the risk and open the door just to see if this man was really a cop. When I opened up, the man on the porch did look like a cop. His hand was on his gun, and he kept looking behind me as if he was searching for something. His behavior made me trust him even less. He began grilling me about my sister, trying to catch me in a lie. "Okay, so who really ran up those stairs? It was my sister." "I already told you. How do I know it's your sister and not the person I'm looking for?" "Look, you have the wrong address." The man glared at me through his aviators. It was hard to see his face because of how big they were. It was like he was trying to hide his face. I know it's a silly thought for a kid, but my mom and I watched tons of true crime shows together. I know it was stupid to open the door, but I had this sinking feeling that he knew that we were alone. Up to this point, he did not ask for my parents, not even once. I just wanted to keep him in sight because I knew my parents would be home soon. The cop explained to me that the man he was looking for lived at our house, and according to his paperwork, this was still his current address. I informed the cop that we had been living here for a few years now, and I knew for a fact the woman before us lived here alone. This frustrated him, and he informed me in a demanding tone that he was going to check the house himself. No you're not. Young lady, you're interfering with police business. Now open up the door before you get in trouble. I'm not stupid. I know that you need special court papers to come inside. I was in a stubborn mood, and nobody wins against me when I'm in a stubborn mood. Unless, of course, you're my parents. Cop or not, this man wasn't coming inside the house or going anywhere near my siblings. That's when he demanded to speak to my parents for the first time. Where are your parents? I want to speak to them about your behavior. He was trying to use the get me into trouble tactic to frighten me. In reality, my mom was far scarier than him. He would have been afraid of my mom because she's the type to kick someone's ass and then ask questions later. But she doesn't play around when it comes to her kids. She wouldn't assault or threaten a police officer, but he would have been in for it. Because my mom would have unleashed a verbal onslaught, full-blown Karen mode, level 10. My parents aren't here right now, they're at the grocery store. I had a feeling that he already knew my parents weren't home. Up until then, he hadn't asked for them. I didn't know if he was a cop or not, but I didn't want to aggravate him further by telling him a lie. I know that my behavior was annoying, but I wasn't going to give him a reason to call me a liar. That's when he reached for the screen door and tried to open it. That's when he discovered it was locked. Open the damn door. I said no. I then slammed the door shut so he couldn't ask me again. I snuck halfway up the stairs and listened. He began yanking and tugging on the screen door. I should arrest you and teach you a lesson. After that, he just walked through our neighbor's yard like nothing happened. That's when I realized that I never saw any cars in our driveway. We lived in townhomes, so I could see all the vehicles from a distance, and I didn't spot a single cruiser parked nearby. My parents showed up almost right after you left. I told my mom what happened. Well, you shouldn't have opened the door, and you should have called me right away. What's the matter with you? You're grounded. Now come help me with the groceries. I couldn't help but notice that our neighbors checked on us far more often after this incident, and our parents got us a babysitter whenever they left the house without us. I'm not 100% sure, but something tells me that the man who came to the house wasn't a cop, and I would have put my family in danger by allowing him inside. To everyone listening, teach your kids that a uniform is just not enough. You should ask for their badge number and call the police station to verify if you can. It also doesn't hurt to invest in a strong, sturdy screen door.